Welcome to the Gay and Lesbian History on Stamps virtual presentation of mystery history covers going beyond the obvious, presented by Larry Crain. Larry is active in the philatelic community, holding leadership roles as Executive Secretary of the Northwest Federation of Stamp Clubs, President of Northern California Council of Philatelic Societies, a regional judge, an exhibit chair of SOPEX, and much, much more. In his free time, Larry is a collector and exhibitor of unique and fun philately. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I find it fun anyway. Mystery history covers. Well, this is a cover that has more story to it than it just appears. I mean, all right, North Borneo, sort of an exotic place. And it is mailed, as you can find out in the back, by a Jikin Gade from Tango, North Borneo, via, well, let's go to the next screen and we can see the way that it sort of traveled. The map down in the lower corner shows some of these places. Actually, Gay was on a Peace Corps mission up 4 hours on a river. Actually, I'd say that 4 days up on a river. Was a very early Peace Corps volunteer, was there in one of the first 5 groups, I think. Her probably most interesting episode was in the first few months she was there, she brought by canoe a man who had been cored. Obviously, she was in a health project. And so from this small cover, tattered as it is, you get a story that is more than very interesting in my thing. The letter actually first traveled by canoe or boat, then it was hand carried by truck, then it was placed on a bus, and it eventually got to the post office on the coast where it then was mailed to Washington. Anytime there are questions, send it on and we'll just keep on going. The next one, Sir John Dalton. Well, who is Sir John Dalton? It's a postcard, has a BM cancellation, which is not from the United States. The United States cancellation is sort of rising off the cover. It was sent to Windsor Castle. So there's got to be a story there. Next. Sir John Dalton was actually the canon of St. George's Chapel. He met Queen Victoria on the Isle of Wight many years earlier, and she asked him to tutor her 2 sons, Prince Albert and George. George later became King George V. And he was very active in the church in Windsor Castle. In fact, you see a stained glass window that is in the church itself with his family's coat of arms and his name. He died at the age of 92, but read a lesson in the chapel the day before he died. Next. 2 covers. Postcard from the United States that was mailed to Riga, Russia. This was when Riga was part of Russia. It was mailed on the 17th from New York and arrived in Riga the 18th. Not bad travel for 1901. The other one maybe did a little better. It was mailed from Helsinki, Russia. Helsinki at the time was part of Russia, and it went to Riga. It was mailed on the 26th of April and arrived on the 15th, 11 days before it was mailed. All right, so what's the story? Don't we know about this? Well, as it turns out, the 2 places it was mailed from were on the Gregorian calendar, but Russia was, and therefore Riga was still on the Julian calendar. And at that time, there was a 13 days difference. It was a few years later when they brought the 2 calendars into agreement and they added 13 days so they would come out the same. Of course, that all went through a story of why Easter kept moving all over the place and the planting season changed and so on. So, over hundreds of years, it did make a difference. Next. A cover that is got a lot blacked out. And what's the reason for that? Well, I have a supposition. And probably besides the stamps, the most significant thing in there is a purple cancel in the middle. What does that mean? And I think that explains. It was mailed in Austria to probably Switzerland. That seems to be Zurich in there, but I'm not positive about that. So next. It seems that that purple statement said on April the 10th, the Fuhrer, vote yes. This was just before Austria was voting in 1938 to decide whether it wanted to become part of Germany or not. Well, 99% of the people voted yes. Maybe there wasn't much of a choice. We have a picture there of the German and Austrian police dismantling the border so that Austria became part of Germany. And I am suspecting that the names are blacked out. And on the other side, the sender is also blacked out. These are people who did not want to be associated or recognized one way or another with what was going on in the pre-World War II days. Next. I went to a dealer at CPEX a few years ago and I said, I want a sort of a drab cover that's got a story to it. And the dealer brought this one out. Certainly drab, mailed from Latvia to Waukegan, Illinois. And the story involves basketball, the Olympics, and Ripley's Believe It or Not. So let's see why. Next. It seems that Walter Bundras was a basketball player and scorer for Marquette University. He is listed in Ripley's Believe It or Not because he scored 9 points in the first 55 seconds of a game against Grinnell, Iowa. Believe it or not, 9 points, 55 seconds. And that was before the three-point shot. Because of his nationality and because of his success as a basketball player, he was asked to coach the Lithuanian national basketball team, which did win the 1938 Euro Basketball Championship, and they were one of the favorites for the 1940 Olympics in Tokyo. But those Olympics were never held after the invasion of Poland. Okay, next. This cover maybe isn't that much of a mystery because when you see it was returned by the censor, a 1940 cover, for the reason explained in the memorandum, which was still in the envelope, so I get to pull it out. And it said that the communication will be allowed to proceed if passages referring to landmines are admitted. Why in 1940 was England concerned about censoring the location of landmines? Next. Well, it seems that in 1940, of course, World War II was starting, and the story was, or the belief was, that Hitler was going to prepare an invasion to England. In fact, it was called Operation Sea Lion. The Germans ended up not doing it and setting it aside. But that's why the British were mining, putting mines on the beaches in preparation for that. Interestingly enough, I have had me and students of mine try and find out information. We cannot find anything. Apparently that information is still classified and not let out. But of course, the pictures down below are the Allies' invasion on the beaches of Normandy several years later. Next. Another World War II cover, this one in the Pacific. It was mailed from Chico, California by what I assume was a professor at Chico State College to an ex-student, but you will see noted in script that the person it was sent to had deceased, had been killed then on February 13th, 1945. By searching things out and getting on the information, able to verify probably when or in what battle he was killed on. So next. There were a few battles around that time, but the best one, the most likely one, was the Battle of Leyte, where there were 15,000 plus US deaths, and then the coordinated Battle of Leyte Gulf, which was a sea battle with warships that was going on at much the same time. The US did win that in pushing Japan out, and you have a picture down below of MacArthur wading ashore, fulfilling his promise of I shall return. The other cover stuck on there is the time period of Japanese occupation in the Philippines, and the brown stamp in there, which the Japanese put out as propaganda, has the volcano, which is near the town that this cover was sent from. And in the background is Mount Fuji, showing we're the same. We both have volcanoes and they're both part of our life. Next. Cover with Champion of Liberty stamps mailed to Czechoslovakia, marked return, and a sticker added that says not admittable. Why? Why wouldn't the Czechs allow this? And I say the Czechs, but this was then after the war, so it was behind the Iron Curtain, so it was Soviet controlled. Next. Well, the champion, one of the champion, or both of the Champion of Liberty stamps were for Tomas Masaryk, who after World War I became a speaker for independence of Czechoslovakia. He actually came to the United States, met with Woodrow Wilson, spoke to a large crowd of Czech refugees and citizens in Chicago. He then became president of Czechoslovakia and was elected to three 7-year terms. Therefore, he is a hero of Czechoslovakian independence and freedom, something that the Soviets and the Czech government at the time did not want noticed. The other cover in there is a Czech cover. It's actually after World War I, but the bottom part of it has been erased because it was a cover that was sent out during the Kaiser's occupation of Czechoslovakia. Next. Cover I bought for $1 at Westpex in a box, mailed to Suez, and with a nice cancel of the Brazilian Air Force. There had to be a story here, and hey, what's $1? Well, the story is, next, that Nasser in England had nationalized the Suez Canal. The British, the French, and the Israelis did not like that, and they landed paratroops to occupy the canal and open it back up. Of course, the United Nations ended up sending in a peacekeeping force, got the 3 nations to withdraw. This was the first United Nations peacekeeping force, and Brazil was one of the 11 nations that sent people there. The other one is at the same time period, doesn't really fit, but it's about the Hungarian Revolution and another return cover. Next. All right, Greek cover, Greek Expeditionary Forces, free airmail, and what's the story behind this? Well, this is also a peacekeeping force, United Nations peacekeeping force that the Greeks were involved in, next to Korea. And as it turns out, when this letter was in transit, a outpost Harry, north of Seoul, which was manned by the Greeks, was attacked and 13 Greeks were killed. I do not know if the addressee to this cover was one of it. I haven't been able to find that out. Later on, this company was honored with the Distinguished Unit Citation for heroism in repelling the Chinese forces. We know about it mainly because of, or at least I do because I love the show MASH, we know it because of MASH. If you look at that picture, and the picture is of Greek, the Greek company P, but there were very similar pictures taken on MASH showing the MASH crew. And the cover down below was actually sent many years later to a Ronald Cleaver at Ouijanbu. And the Army tried to find Ouijanbu by sending it all over the place, and it was never found. Well, the truth is, Ouijanbu is really only in the Santa Monica Hills as the movie site of MASH. Next. All right, mundane cover. Nothing particularly exciting about it. All right, it was canceled on Halloween, but it was USS Marius, which of course is a ship canceled. Has an American credo stamp on it, give me liberty or give me death, which is sort of appropriate to the history that it got involved in. Next, it seems that it was sent at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis during the blockade of Cuba. Well, I wanted a cover to be able to show this time in history, but was told you're not going to find one because all the US ships were under blackout and they could not cancel and show anything because they didn't want the information to be known where they were. Well, this one got through possibly as a loophole. This was not a ship in the blockade. This was an oiler that brought fuel to these ships so they could maintain their places. So it wasn't really a blockade ship. And I use blockade hesitantly because technically blockade is a statement of war by international law. So the cover you see there in the middle down below, when the ships came back, it said Cuban blockade duty, but blockade was blocked out because they didn't, it wasn't a declaration of war. And then the picture down in the corner is Fidel Castro and Khrushchev. Next. Cover I bought at a club auction. Nice clean cover with a Sonora, Mexico state stamp at the time of the Cuban Revolution, 1915. There has to be a story to it. Well, the story is the railroad. It is the Southern Pacific Railroad, which I didn't know, but had a branch going from Arizona way down toward Guadalajara. And this cover was mailed, I think, at kilometer 842, which would have been 842 kilometers south of Nogales. That's approximately 500 miles. And you can see that in the cancel. The cancel also says FCSP de Mexico, Southern Pacific Railroad of Mexico. So I didn't know Southern Pacific had a railroad route in Mexico, but they did. Next. Fun little cover with the neat Pompey's Pillar of Montana cancel, but applied crosswise onto half-cent stamps. Well, the half-cent stamp had the whole story in themselves, but my concern here is Pompey. Who was Pompey that Pompey's Pillar was named after? Roman general by the name of Pompey, but that's not it. It seems that Pompey Pillar was named by William Clark in July 1806 on his return trip. This was the Lewis and Clark expedition. And Pompey was Sacagawea's son, who was born on the trip. His real name was Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, but he got the nickname of Pomp. And so Clark named this rock formation, picture I took myself, of Pompey's Pillar. Next. Another not particularly remarkable cover, 2 4-cent stamps because it was overweight, several pages on the inside, which were still there. And maybe some of the mystery is taken away if you read the handwriting, which says seconding speech nomination of Calvin Coolidge for president, which was on the inside. So I have a copy of Calvin Coolidge's secondary speech, but what's the story beyond that? Well, it seems that it was made by an Oregon delegate, and remind you that I'm in Oregon, and it was because, and if we go back in our history, Calvin Coolidge was the vice president when Hardee died. He was nominated to be vice president in the 1920 convention, but he wasn't supposed to have been. The political bosses, the senators, had managed to get the nomination of Warren Harding through, a senator from Ohio, and they had arranged to have Senator Irving Linroot of Wisconsin, the vice presidential candidate. They thought it was all wrapped up, so they left the night after Coolidge, but before the vice presidential nomination, took the train back to Washington. Well, during a nomination speech of another person, Walter McCormick from Oregon climbed up on his chair and started chanting, Coolidge, 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 Coolidge. And he ended up getting the floor, turning the convention into quite a story. And by the time they got done, they had nominated Coolidge to be vice president. So when Coolidge then became president, he tried to thank McCormick by appointing him to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But he did it at a time when Senate was not in session. So that was considered a recess appointment, but it still had to be approved when the Senate came back. Well, McCormick managed to serve for a while, but when the Senate came back, they refused to nominate McCormick. And that is the only, to this date, recess appointment by a president that was not confirmed by the Senate. But the Senate was getting even with Coolidge and getting even for McCormick for undoing their will at the convention in 1920. Next. Sort of a messy, torn up cover that started in Madagascar. The stamps are on the back. Went to Dakar, Senegal, and went to a few other places. The story behind it is, who is Auguste Chevalier, if my French is okay, which it shouldn't be. Who was he? Well, that's it. We're okay. Next. He was a French botanist and explorer who went through Africa, Asia, and South America, looking at trees and grasses and et cetera in these places. At the time, he apparently had made friends with somebody in Madagascar. And when he left, they wrote him, tried to get a letter to him, which I think didn't actually catch up with him until he was back in France, but it chased him down. He was going next to Senegal, but wasn't there. It was also sent to the Congo, and he was not there. He, later then, in 1929, became the president of the French Botanical Society and was elected to the French Academy of Sciences, and 4 plant genera have been named in his honor. Next. Another cover, this is actually a linen or type bag sent to a Dr. Carlton Coon's Peabody Museum in Cambridge. Who was Carlton Coon? Next. Well, sort of like the previous one, he was a person who traveled the world. He was actually an anthropologist, was the president of the American Association of Physical Anthropologists, had discovered a Neanderthal skeleton in 1939 that helped our understanding of Neanderthal man. But beyond that, his travel undercover as an anthropologist, he was helping to smuggle arms during World War II to the French resistance in German-held Morocco. In addition, I guess maybe a negative on his side, he wrote a book called The Origin of Races, and many have used that as a justification of racism. He basically said the races were different. Next. A third sort of explorer cover. This one is mailed to the to New Haven, Connecticut, to the Peabody Museum there. I think it's the Peabody, to a Mrs. Hiram Bingham. And if you look up on the return address, you can see just above it, a H. Bingham is the person who mailed it. So he was mailing it to his wife. Who was Hiram Bingham? Well, several things, as we will see next. He was the person who is credited with discovering Machu Picchu in Peru, which of course is where the cover is from. He at the time was a professor of history at Yale University and did that organization and was one of the first to enter the ruins in July 24th, which would have been just after the cover was mailed. He was also a US Senator for 12 years, and he was the governor of Connecticut for 1 day. He ran for governor, was elected in November, and in December, late December, one of the Connecticut senators died in office, and he was encouraged by others to not be governor, but to be senator. But in order for that to happen, he served 1 day as governor of Connecticut, and in that 1 day, he appointed himself to be senator. He was later elected himself, so he served 12 years total. Next. A simple cover from El Dorado, Illinois, but I collect El Dorado post offices. There are 37 El Dorado town names in US states. Actually, there's more than 37. There's 37 states, and some states have more than one. California in particular has an El Dorado Hills, an El Dorado, and an El Dorado, I can't think of the other one. Dropped my mind. Anyway, this one is mailed from El Dorado, Illinois, to Evanston, Indiana, and you see the souvenir sheet down below of what El Dorado is all about. It seems that El Dorado was what the Spaniards were told when they came into Colombia saying, "Oh, we like your gold. Can we have more gold?" And they said, "Well, we don't have any more. It's over there." There is this golden king who was bathed in gold, and he had gold all over him. And in fact, some people believed it was a golden city. And so they went out looking for El Dorado, never found it, of course, and it was believed to be basically an excuse to get the Spaniards to go somewhere else. But this particular gold raft was found, and it verified the story that this king was covered in oil, gold dust was blown on him. He went out on a raft, and that was part of the ceremony as he became king of this particular group. Now, this particular king and his kingdom was conquered before 1492, so that it was legend at the time, but it got rid of the Spanish. The interesting thing about the cover, though, is one, it has a connection to the Beatles, and two, of the 37 states that have an El Dorado, this is the only one that was not named after the story that I just told you. It was named for the town founders, a Samuel Elder and a Joseph Reed, and they called the town El Dorado. Well, when they got the railroad to come through, they needed a sign, put the town name, and the sign painter was told to put the name of the town was El Dorado. Well, he assumed that these people didn't know how to spell. And so he wrote the sign, according to the story anyway, El Dorado. And they thought it was good enough. So why the Beatles? Well, 6 months before the Beatles appeared on this Ed Sullivan show, George Harrison, who had a sister near El Dorado, went to visit his sister, and they went to a dance at the Elks Lodge in El Dorado. And his sister said that he played, and so they invited him up on the stage to be able to play along with the band for a couple of numbers. So it's the first appearance of a Beatle in the United States. Next. Another interesting person is Tomas Mosquera, who was the president of 3 countries. You have 2 pre-philatelic covers there, one to him as Mr. Tomas Mosquera and the other one as General Tomas Mosquera. Next. And then if you pick up the third one here down in the bottom, it was sent to President Tomas Mosquera. So he was the president of 3 countries. He was the president of the Republic of New Granada, president of the Grenadine Confederation, and the president of the United States of Colombia. That's a little misleading. It's not that he was, in a way, the president of 3 different countries. He was president of the same country with 3 different names. He also, as a general, led his forces against Ecuador when they were battling Ecuador, so he was on the battlefield. Interesting person, and was probably a hero, one of the heroes of Colombia, not involved in their revolution like Simón Bolívar. Next. A cover postcard, actually, uprated for international mail, sent to Tacna, Chile. Something's wrong there. I'm sort of going to stutter for a moment to let you think about it. 2 cents international mail from New Jersey to Tacna, Chile in 1910. Well, next, the problem is Tacna is not in Chile. It's in Peru, except that in 1910 it was in Chile. The history behind that is that at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, actually that territory was part of Bolivia, but it was being developed by Chilean businessmen and Chilean workers. And Bolivia decided they wanted to raise more money, so they put a tax on it. The Chileans didn't like that. There was a revolution, well, not a revolution, there was a revolt anyway. Bolivia ended up having a secret treaty with Peru. Chile, when they brought real forces in to try and support their people who were revolting, it was the War of the Pacific, Chile against Bolivia and Peru. Chile won. Bolivia lost most of the territory. Peru sort of had to go through the embarrassment of having a plane fly over the capital, dropping leaflets saying, "We are the Chilean Air Force and we can beat you," because Peru had no Air Force to speak of. But when the peace treaty was decided, it was set out that part of the area around the town of Tacna and part of the area around the town of Arica would vote to see whether they wanted to be part of Peru or part of Arica. That plebiscite was held, and in Tacna, Peru won. So Chile turned over control of Tacna to the Peruvians, and in Arica, Chile won. Interestingly enough, the train station in Arica was designed by the same person who designed the Eiffel Tower. Next. Cover having to do with another South American border dispute. Peru is again involved in this one. The cancel is of the Society of Nations, or that's the Spanish of the League of Nations. It was a dispute that the League of Nations was asked to help out. They sent people in, including peacekeepers, but what's the story? Well, Leticia, which is on the Amazon River, has a sort of a panhandle sticking down, And like the previous story, the people who developed the area were mostly Peruvians and not Colombian. And for the same reason as the Chileans in Arica and Tacna, they tried to hold a revolution. They took over the government. They got a lot of support, as the postcard down below shows, in Peru. Um, the League of Nations was asked to bring in and adjudicate, and they actually ruled that there was a very clear treaty between Peru and Colombia in the 1880s that said that Colombia was to have access by a piece of land down into the Amazon River. So they ruled in favor of Colombia. Uh, and it didn't become a war, maybe because both Peru and Colombia wanted to send warships. The problem is that the Colombian warships were on the Caribbean coast, and to get to Leticia, they had to go all around northern South America and go up the Amazon River for 700 miles. And for Peru, with their warships, they had to go all the way around Tierra del Fuego on the south and then go up those same 700 miles. So it was a success for the League of Nations, one of their very few, some people say their only one. And actually, Fran Adams had a wonderful exhibit at GAS in Chicago on the Leticia affair. Next. Cover, again, rather simple, and the story is in the overprint of the red stamp. It was in 1973, and it was overprinted. And you can see in their refugee relief sort of upside down in the blown up version. Relief is clear, refugee is not. So what's going on next? Well, when India and Pakistan were divided, Pakistan ended up with two pieces, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. But East Pakistan didn't particularly like being controlled by West Pakistan, which was 1,000 miles away on the other side of India. So there were protests against the Pakistani government. There was a revolution. The Pakistanis from East sent in armed forces, and there was a refugee problem. In part, the refugees were mostly Hindus coming out of East Pakistan, flowing into India to avoid the war. That area became known now as Bangladesh because it did succeed, but there were an estimated 10 million refugees that fled into India. It was eventually settled in that Bangladesh was given its independence. And I have another interesting connection with George Harrison because he had an album called Bangladesh. How are we doing on time, Lisa? Okay. All right. This cover is, well, postcard, maybe I should say, just looked interesting. And so when you look it out, you find out it is for pneumatic mail. One, I didn't know there was pneumatic mail. But what is pneumatic? Well, for those of you old enough to remember going into department stores many, many years ago in the last millennium, you maybe paid your bill and the person on the floor took your money and a receipt, opened up a little tube, put the money in the tube, closed it, and then opened up a larger tube, a pipe actually, stuck it in there, and by air pressure, whoop, it went up to the bookkeeper somewhere else in the store. That is pneumatic mail. Well, I didn't know there was mail sent that way. But Vienna, which is where this postcard is from, was the fourth city to use a pneumatic mail system. The postcard that you see down there is about the dedication of the Boston pneumatic mail system in 1926. Prague in Czechoslovakia had 34 miles of tubes. for their pneumatic mail. In New York, there were 23 offices that were connected by tubes for pneumatic mail, quick delivery from one office to another, and it was used up until 1953. Okay, next. These are just parts of covers, but there could be a story behind each of them, but it's really the same story. The Prague cancel is blank on the bottom. The Nazi Graz cover is blacked out on the bottom. It's actually wax. And the Frankfurt cancel is also blacked out. In this case, there were Nazi slogans or Nazi statements that were in there, and these cancels were used after World War II. Before they could get new cancels, they either scratched them out in Prague or Frankfurt, or the British in Graz actually used wax to cover it up so that when it was used, you couldn't see the German Nazi slogans. Next. Well, all sorts of covers can be found for conflicts around the world. And I'll go down the middle. And so the covers are starting on the left and they're going back and forth. But the first one is the Congo in 1962, when Katanga tried to separate, actually did print stamps. The stamps were not officially legal, but they were recognized in some cases in international mail. The next one is the 1952 Vietnamese cover, which has relationship to the Vietnamese fighting against the French before the Vietnam War started, that we got involved in. The next cover is 1988 from Cambodia, and it has to do with mail interruption in Southeast Asia, and that's because of Pot Paul and his killing of millions of Cambodians. The Cyprus cover in 1980 is when North Cyprus and South Cyprus, North supported by Turkey and South supported by Greece, although basically independent Cyprus, still held their battle lines. The 1982 cover is from Haiti, when there was a revolution and postal service was temporarily suspended. The Sri Lanka cover in 1985 is with the Tamil revolution. And then the last one on the bottom left is 1999, service suspended to Sierra Leone for their revolution. This is the story where the idea of boy soldiers is probably known, where boys 10, 11, 12, 14 years old were given guns and sent out by the revolutionaries to fight the army. And all of these covers have something on them to indicate that they were in a conflict zone. Okay, next. This cover is not mine, and this is the last one. But this cover relates to the University of Oregon, the New York Times, fourth graders who tried to get pen pals, Congressman Charles O. Porter of Oregon, the FBI, the Cold War, and my dad. It's actually on the cover of a 200-page book, and it was mailed to Roseburg. There's the book. And the story is that a fourth grade teacher wanted to expand the viewpoint of his fourth graders and talked about getting pen pals for them. And pen pals were quite common. I was actually a junior in high school at this time, and I had 3 pen pals, one from Canada, one from the Philippines, and one from Colombia. So it was really quite common, but they decided they wanted to get it from a far away mysterious place, which was Russia. And they couldn't find anything, so they wrote Congressman Charles Porter to see if he could help them. He went to the State Department to see help. The State Department went to the FBI to see if this was a good idea. The FBI said no. Well, at this point, it made the news. that the FBI had denied fourth graders from getting pen pals to Russia. And it became international news. There were blurbs and pieces of it in the Soviet Union as well as England and other places. University of Oregon gets into it because the professor in the School of Journalism noticed that in the New York Times one time, in their back in history 40 years earlier, the FBI had stopped Roseburg, Oregon fourth graders from getting pen pals. Well, he thought this would be a good project for his journalism students to be able to find out what it was. So he gave them the whole day to go to the library and get online to find the story. They got so involved that it ended up being a project for the rest of the semester and ended up being in this book. Well, the fourth grade teacher was a teacher in the school where my dad was the principal. And so his name is in there. Interestingly enough, even though I was a junior at the high school at the time, I was oblivious to all of this. I don't think it made the news or much of the news in Roseburg, but I do remember one time that my dad had to go to Portland, and it ended up that he was going up to Portland to talk to the FBI. Okay. I can take questions or love to have questions, or we could just quit.
Any questions in the audience? Well, thank you very much, Larry. I feel your presentation is really timely currently with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It's moving. It's also very interesting. I want to go to the dollar box and go find a whole bunch of covers to investigate.
Well, I only found one in the dollar box, but I do buy about a couple of them for $5.
All right, well, that's all the time that we have then, if there's no questions. Thank you for attending. And if you have any questions, either about this or a mystery cover that you find, email Larry Crain at gmail.com. Thank you.
And I thank you for listening.
Thanks, Larry. That was great. I totally enjoyed those covers.
Well, and I mean, I've got quite a collection of them. They're fantastic, but the searching of the information is also entirely fun.
Yes, thanks, Larry. I really enjoyed this very much. I'm going to look at my covers in a different way now.
Yes, well, I hope so. I hope that all of you will go to your covers and find some. I'll bet there's more story here in here. And if you get started and get lucky, and the internet is pretty good, you'll find something that leads one thing to another thing to another thing. That's kind of what happened of how I ended up getting George Harrison on the El Dorado cover. I just learned about El Dorado and learned about the railroad and got the story of the name. But then there was a link in there that sounded music, and I followed it, and it ended up George Harrison and the Beatles.
I think.